what if the most crucial lessons for a well-lived life aren't primarily about what you do, but actually about who you become? We often spend so much time focusing on rules, on actions, driven by that question, what should I do?
Right, the immediate decision.
Exactly. But there's this deeper, far more ancient wisdom that sort of shifts that focus entirely. It asks instead, what kind of person should I be?
That's a much bigger question.
It is. And here's where it gets really interesting. This profound, centuries-old question, which was once foundational to education and personal development, well, it's now making this powerful, almost surprising comeback.
Yeah.
It's resonating deeply in our schools, it's influencing our legal systems, and, increasingly shaping our personal journeys, too.
It really is like a return to first principles, isn't it? Recognizing that while, okay, our actions are undeniably important, the character, the virtues that actually underpin those actions, that's what truly sculpts a meaningful life.
And a thriving society, presumably.
And a thriving society, absolutely. This isn't some fleeting trend, this idea. I mean, it did briefly fade from the spotlight in some Western democracies, that's true.
Right.
But it's experiencing this powerful revival now, and it's being fueled by both modern philosophy and social science. Real evidence behind it.
And that's precisely what we're plunging into today. We're embarking on a deep dive into this, captivating world of character, virtues, and of course their opposites, vices.
The whole package.
The whole package. We're going to try and unpack why developing good character has historically been seen as, and is now powerfully reemerging as, perhaps the ultimate aim of a well-lived life.
Okay.
We'll trace the roots of these ideas going way back to ancient philosophy, especially looking at Aristotle's insights.
Can't avoid Aristotle on this topic.
Definitely not. And then we'll swiftly bring them right into the modern era, exploring how they apply, sometimes profoundly, in today's education systems.
And beyond education, too, right?
Oh, yeah. We'll even venture into some unexpected territory, like a courtroom, to see how something as complex and nuanced as anger can actually manifest as either a vice or a virtue.
Depending on the context.
Depending on its justification, its manifestation. Yeah. It's fascinating stuff.
So our mission for you today, listening in, it's simple, but maybe a bit ambitious. We want to give you a shortcut, basically, to being truly well-informed about this pivotal topic.
Get you up to speed quickly.
Exactly. We'll extract the most important nuggets of knowledge, the key insights from our sources, offer up some surprising facts along the way, and, hopefully just enough humor to keep you thoroughly engaged.
We'll try our best on that front.
We'll try. By the end of this deep dive, the goal is you'll have a clear, pretty comprehensive framework for understanding character. And, importantly, some practical ways to think about cultivating virtues in your own life.
Right, making it useful.
Yeah, get ready to gain maybe the new lens, through which to view your actions, your intentions, and ultimately your impact on the world.
Okay, so to really begin this journey into character, let's start with that foundational insight, as you said, from Aristotle. He put it so well, so succinctly. He said, the aim of our studies is not just to know what virtue is, but to become good.
Powerful.
That one sentence alone, it sets such a powerful tone, doesn't it? It immediately shifts the focus from just, intellectual understanding to actual transformative personal growth.
It absolutely does. And it brings us straight to that core concept you mentioned earlier, eudaimonia.
Right.
And while, it's often loosely translated as happiness, that word just doesn't quite capture the richness of it, does it?
No, it feels too fleeting.
Exactly. Eudaimonia is far more accurately understood as, human flourishing or living well, truly fulfilling one's full potential as a human being.
It's not just about having a good mood on a Tuesday.
Definitely not. It's not just about feeling good. It's about being good, functioning well. It's the widely accepted goal of life itself, according to Aristotle and, frankly, many who followed him.
And he positioned this eudaimonia not just as a good thing, but as the highest good. The, what do philosophers call it, the summum bonum?
The summum bonum, the ultimate good. He argued that eudaimonia is unique because it's chosen purely for its own sake, and crucially, everything else we choose in life.
Like honor, pleasure?
Right, honor, pleasure, reason, any particular virtue you can name. Ultimately, we choose those things for the sake of eudaimonia.
So they're not just means to an end, like tools to get happiness.
That's a key distinction. They aren't just means to the end. Aristotle saw them as constituents of flourishing. They are the essential building blocks that make up a flourishing life. Like, you can't flourish without reason or without certain virtues. They're part of the package.
Okay, that makes sense. They're part of the structure itself.
Precisely. And what's particularly profound here, I think, is that Aristotle firmly believed this state of flourishing, this eudaimonia, is achievable by the average person.
Really, not just for, like, philosophers meditating on a mountaintop.
No, this wasn't some exclusive club for philosophers or saints. He saw it as a potential within reach for most individuals who put in the effort.
Right.
He also saw it as uniquely human. That was a key differentiator for him.
How so?
Well, this is why he firmly ruled out a life purely devoted to pleasure, for example. He argued that while, sure, animals can certainly experience pleasure, that doesn't represent the full spectrum of human potential or our distinct human activities.
We're capable of more.
Exactly. And crucially, eudaimonia isn't a passive state. It's not a feeling you just wake up with one morning. It is unequivocally an activity.
An activity, so you have to do something.
Yes, you don't just possess courage like a trophy on a shelf. You act courageously. It's something you actively do. It's a continuous engagement with life.
That's why we praise someone for a brave act, not just for being brave in theory.
Precisely. It requires active participation, a constant striving towards excellence in how we live.
So, okay, if this ultimate good, this flourishing, is all about fulfilling our uniquely human potential through activity, a question naturally comes up, doesn't it? How can something be considered self-sufficient, which Aristotle said eudaimonia was, if we, as humans, are so obviously social creatures?
Right. He famously called us political animals, didn't he? Meaning we're fundamentally embedded in communities.
Exactly. How does that square with self-sufficiency?
This is a really brilliant insight of his, I think. He reconciled this seeming paradox. He argued that while eudaimonia is self-sufficient in the sense that once attained, it lacks nothing essential to make a life better. It's complete in itself.
Okay.
It implicitly requires social connection for its full expression. Our flourishing as humans fundamentally depends on living within a society, interacting with others, not in isolation.
So you can't truly flourish alone on a desert island.
Not in the full Aristotelian sense, no. A human being removed from the context of human society isn't truly fulfilling their potential as a human being. It's like a chess piece. It only has its meaning and function within the context of the game of chess.
I like that analogy. The game piece only makes sense as part of the game.
Exactly. We are designed in a way to connect, to collaborate, to contribute within a community. That's part of our function, part of our flourishing.
That really clarifies it. Okay, with that solid philosophical groundwork laid, let's zero in now on defining character and virtue more specifically. Our sources are pretty clear here. Character is essentially a set of personal traits or dispositions.
Habits of mind and action, really.
Right, and these influence our moral emotions, they shape our motivations, and ultimately, they guide our conduct.
Yeah. And virtues. Those are the positive personal strengths within that set of traits. They're the ones that empower us to act in ways that cultivate and develop our full human potential.
So it really is that fundamental shift, isn't it? From just asking, what should I do right now? To asking, who should I strive to be?
Precisely. And this contrasts really sharply with what's often called the moral principles approach. You know, the one that tends to focus heavily on rules and duties.
Like codes of conduct, lists of do's and don'ts.
Exactly. Virtue ethics, by centering on what kind of person should I be, argues that character is the more fundamental inquiry. The thinking is, basically, if you genuinely focus on being a good person, on cultivating virtues, you will naturally, almost instinctively, be inclined to do good things.
Your actions become an authentic expression of who you are inside.
Yes, rather than just a sort of reluctant adherence to external regulations or fear of punishment.
So the ultimate aim of character education, then, it moves way beyond simply memorizing rules or ethical codes.
Oh, absolutely. It's about empowering students, or anyone really, to genuinely grasp what is ethically important in a situation and, crucially, to act from the right reasons.
Not just because they were told to.
Right. This cultivation fosters greater autonomy, more reflection in individuals. It helps them develop what Aristotle famously called good sense, or phronesis, practical wisdom.
Practical wisdom. We'll come back to that one, I bet.
We definitely will. It's key. It's that capacity to choose intelligently, to navigate wisely in complex, often ambiguous situations where the rules don't give you a clear answer.
And it's truly fascinating, as you mentioned earlier, to note that character education is far from some newfangled idea.
Not at all. Historically, if you look back, stretching from ancient civilizations right through much of the 20th century, cultivating character was unequivocally central to schooling. It was just assumed to be part of the mission.
So what happened? Why did it fade?
That's a complex historical question, but it did briefly vanish or at least diminish significantly from curricula in some Western democracies. Maybe a focus shifted more towards cognitive skills alone, or there were worries about imposing values. But it was almost like a historical blip, because now it's seeing this powerful revival. And this resurgence isn't just coming from philosophy, from virtue ethics, it's also strongly bolstered by contemporary social science. Think positive psychology.
Right, the science of well-being.
Exactly. And there's also this burgeoning public policy consensus, interestingly, across the political spectrum and even in various industries, recognizing that moral and civic character are absolutely pivotal for sustaining healthy economies and robust democracies.
It was not just about individual niceness.
Not at all. It's about building foundational human qualities like resilience, integrity, cooperation that benefit everyone, that make societies work better.
Okay, given that, it seems really important to clear up some common misconceptions. What isn't character education? Because it often gets unfairly pigeonholed, doesn't it?
It really does. First off, it's not exclusively religious. It thrives just as well in secular environments. The virtues we talk about, honesty, compassion, courage, are pretty universal.
Okay, what else?
Nor is it inherently paternalistic, like schools trying to impose their values on kids against parents' wishes. Quite the opposite, actually. Empirical research overwhelmingly shows that parents actively desire schools to help develop their children's character. They see it as a partnership.
That's a really important finding.
It is. And it's certainly not just some conservative agenda, nor is it simply about fixing kids who are seen as problematic. That's a very narrow and negative framing.
So what's the broader aim then?
Well, its ultimate aim really extends beyond just individual betterment. It genuinely seeks to create the social and institutional conditions where all members of society have a better chance to flourish. It's about fostering collective well-being, shared prosperity, a more ethical society overall.
Right.
And the key takeaway here, I think, is that for character education to actually be effective, it absolutely must be intentional. It needs to be planned, systematically organized within a school or community.
You can't just hope it happens by accident.
Yeah, exactly. It cannot be assumed to happen organically, unconsciously, or just through random chance encounters. It requires deliberate effort, structure, and design.
That distinction between intentional and, well, random is absolutely crucial. Without intent, you really are just leaving it to chance.
Mm-hmm.
And speaking of structure, Aristotle's renowned golden mean, or the doctrine of the mean, feels central to understanding virtues in practice. He taught that virtue consistently represents the intermediate value, right? Positioned perfectly between two opposing vices.
Yes, one of excess and one of deficiency. This is one of his most practical and influential contributions, I think. It offers a really helpful lens for understanding virtuous behavior in the real world.
Could you give us an example?
Sure. Consider courage. Courage isn't just an unbridled absence of fear, right? That might actually be recklessness.
Right, charging in foolishly.
Exactly. Instead, courage is the virtue that lies perfectly between the vice of recklessness, which is an excess of boldness, maybe a foolish disregard for real danger, and the vice of cowardice, which is a crippling deficiency of bravery, being paralyzed by fear.
So neither extremer, the reckless charge, or the fearful retreat counts as true virtue.
That's precisely. Virtue is in that middle ground.
But this mean, this middle ground, it isn't just a simple mathematical average, is it? He said it's profoundly relative to us. What does that mean?
That's a critical point. It means it's not some fixed absolute point on a scale for everyone in every situation. It depends entirely on the particular circumstances of the individual agent and the context they find themselves in.
So my mean might be different from yours.
Potentially, yes. This is where practical wisdom, phronesis, comes back in. What constitutes, say, temperance in eating will differ significantly for an Olympic athlete in heavy training compared to someone working a sedentary office job.
Right, the athlete needs way more calories.
Exactly. The virtuous amount for the athlete might be a vice of excess, gluttony, for the office worker, and the office worker's virtuous amount might be a vice of deficiency for the athlete, It's about what's appropriate and excellent for you in your specific situation, tailored to your capabilities, needs, and the context.
That makes it much more nuanced, but also much more realistic.
It does. And another critical, maybe slightly surprising point Aristotle makes is that virtues involve a conscious choice. We experience passions and emotions, fear, joy, anger, often without choosing them, right? They just arise.
Yeah, they can wash over you.
But virtues involve how we consciously choose to act upon those feelings, how we manage and express them, reflecting higher moral standards and our understanding of the situation. That deliberate choice, that application of reason and will to our feelings and actions, is what truly separates virtues from mere fleeting passions or raw emotions. It's about choosing to engage with our emotions and the world in a way that leads towards flourishing.
Okay, that's a really clear foundation. So, with that robust understanding, let's now explore the various building blocks of good character. Our sources have helpfully identified these four core categories of virtues, each playing a vital and distinct role in a flourishing human life.
Right. First up, we have the intellectual virtues.
Okay.
These are the essential character traits we need for discernment, for right action that's informed by knowledge, and just for the relentless pursuit of truth, understanding, and wisdom itself.
So what kind of traits are we talking about here?
Think about qualities like autonomy, that capacity for self-governance, thinking for yourself, critical thinking, the ability to analyze information objectively, evaluate arguments, curiosity, that deep desire to learn and explore, sound judgment, rigorous reasoning, thoughtful reflection, and resourcefulness, finding creative ways to solve problems.
Basically, the mental tools we need.
Exactly. They're the mental tools that equip us to navigate the world intelligently and hopefully ethically.
And you mentioned earlier that within that intellectual realm, there's one virtue that really stands out, almost like a meta virtue. Practical wisdom.
Yes, practical wisdom, or the Greek term phronesis. This is so crucial. It isn't just about accumulating facts or being clever. It's a deeply integrative intellectual virtue. It's one that's really forged and refined through rich experience, through trial and error, and through rigorous critical reflection on that experience.
So it's wisdom gained through living.
Precisely. Phronesis is what empowers us to perceive situations accurately, to truly know what's important, to desire the right things, and most importantly, to act with profound good sense, especially in those messy, complex situations where maybe the demands of two or more other virtues seem to collide.
Like when honesty might conflict with compassion.
Exactly that kind of dilemma. Practical wisdom helps you find that Aristotelian mean, not in a textbook abstractly, but in the chaotic reality of life. It involves considered deliberation, thinking things through carefully, well-founded judgment, making good calls, and then the vigorous enactment of those decisions actually doing it.
And the opposite, living without it.
Well, to live without phronesis is to be thoughtless, maybe indecisive, irresolute, unable to make up your mind, or perhaps even closed-minded, rigidly sticking to a preconceived notion instead of adapting to the specific reality of the situation.
So it's about being flexible and perceptive.
Yes, it's the opposite of being blindly cocksure. It involves being open to learning, to adapting, even to admitting mistakes. It truly is the essential ingredient for good character overall because it doesn't just inform other virtues, it subtly guides and shapes all of them. It helps you apply the right virtue in the right way at the right time.
Okay, that's a huge one.
Yeah.
Then we shift gears to the moral virtues. These feel like what most people think of first when they hear character, right?
Absolutely, and for good reason. These are the traits that directly enable us to act well in situations that demand an ethical response.
Examples.
Well, they are prototypically recognized and valued across incredibly diverse cultures and religious traditions worldwide. We're talking about qualities like compassion, that genuine care and concern for others. Courage, acting with bravery in fearful or challenging situations. Gratitude, appreciating what we have and what others do for us. Honesty, being truthful and sincere. Humility, having a realistic assessment of one's own strengths and weaknesses. Integrity, adhering consistently to strong moral principles. Justice, acting with fairness toward others, honoring their rights and responsibilities. And respect, showing regard for the inherent worth of all individuals.
Those are the big ones, the ethical anchors.
They really are the ethical anchors of our behavior, yes.
Okay, the third category comprises the civic virtues. These sound like they're about how we function together in society.
That's exactly right. These are absolutely indispensable for engaged, responsible citizenship and for contributing meaningfully to the common good, the well-being of our communities and society at large.
So things like
Things like active citizenship, participating, voting, being informed. Civility, treating others with politeness and respect, even when you disagree. Community awareness, understanding the needs and dynamics of your local area. Neighborliness, just being a good, supportive member of your immediate community. Service, contributing to the well-being of others, often through things like volunteering.
These are the virtues that really bind us together.
They are. They ensure a well-functioning, cohesive, and supportive society for everyone. Without them, things tend to fall apart.
And finally, the fourth category, performance virtues. These are sometimes called enabling virtues or soft skills in modern jargon.
Yes, that's the term you often hear in school policy discussions or workplace training, soft skills. These traits hold immense instrumental value because they essentially enable the intellectual, moral, and civic virtues to actually flourish and be effective in the world.
They're like the engine.
Kind of like the engine, yeah. They're the practical drivers behind our actions. Think about confidence, believing in your own abilities to get things done. Determination, that persistent effort towards a goal. Motivation, the inner drive to act. Perseverance, sticking with something even when it gets difficult. Resilience, that remarkable ability to bounce back from setbacks, adapt to change. Teamwork also fits here.
These sound really important for achieving anything.
They are. But it's crucial, absolutely crucial, to emphasize that their ultimate moral value comes from serving morally acceptable ends.
Okay. Explain that.
Well, resilience, for instance, is a wonderful trait. But if you're resiliently pursuing a criminal enterprise or persevering in cheating people,
Then it's not exactly virtuous.
exactly, the performance virtue gains its positive moral weight from the goal it serves. They are the vehicles for the other virtues, ideally not just ends in themselves. You want determination in pursuit of justice, not determination in pursuit of fraud.
That makes perfect sense. So, while it's helpful to break them down into these four categories for understanding, it's really important to remember that these virtues aren't isolated islands. They're meant to form a coherent, mutually supportive whole in a well-rounded, flourishing life.
Absolutely. Character education, when done well, is all about their seamless integration. And practical wisdom, for Nisus, is the guiding force orchestrating that integration.
So, okay, let's bring this back to the listener. What does all this mean for you? How can understanding these categories help?
Well, I think understanding these distinct categories can be a remarkably powerful tool for personal growth, for self-awareness. As you reflect on your own life, your own tendencies, do you find yourself naturally leaning more towards, say, intellectual pursuits and the virtues that support them, like critical thinking or curiosity?
Or maybe you're more action-oriented.
Or maybe you're instinctively drawn to civic engagement, to community service, where civic virtues shine. Perhaps you excel in the performance virtues, you're determined, resilient. But maybe you want to think more consciously about aligning those powerful skills with clearer moral ends.
So it helps you see your profile almost.
Exactly. Recognizing these different facets of character allows for a much more holistic, more intentional approach to your own self-improvement. It helps you see not just where you might already be strong, but also where you might want to consciously focus your energy for deliberate, flourishing development. It gives you a map.
A map for character development. I like that. Okay, now that we've clearly defined what character is, what virtues are, and how they're categorized, let's turn our attention to that fascinating question. How is character actually developed? It's definitely not something you're just born with and then bang, it's fixed in place.
Not at all. Our sources delve into this really compelling neo-Aristotelian model of moral development, which suggests there are actually multiple pathways to becoming virtuous. It's not a one-size-fits-all process.
Okay.
This framework is profoundly grounded in the idea that character development is a journey, right? An ongoing process, not some static destination you reach overnight. Learners might, for instance, smoothly progress from what we call habituated virtue.
What's that exactly?
That's basically developing consistent, positive moral habits through practice, maybe guided by parents or teachers initially, like learning to share or be polite through repetition.
Got it. So starting with the actions.
Right. And from there, they might progress towards autonomously sought and reflectively chosen virtue. This latter stage is where an individual genuinely desires virtue for its own sake. They're driven by intrinsic motivation.
They choose to do good, not because they're told to or because they'll get a reward.
Exactly, but because they deeply believe it's the right thing to do, and it aligns with the kind of person they aspire to be. They've internalized the value.
But it's important to acknowledge, this isn't always a perfectly straight line from A to B, is it? sometimes people might take a detour.
Absolutely. They might initially engage more in what's called practical habituation. Perhaps they gain self-regulation and act virtuously, mainly because of external motivation.
Like wanting praise or avoiding punishment or just fitting in.
Yeah, those kinds of things. That they might do the right thing, but maybe not yet for the deepest reasons. But even this is a crucial step forward. It builds the habits.
And that seems to offer a really hopeful lesson, doesn't it? For educators, parents, anyone trying to cultivate character, either in themselves or others.
It really does. The model strongly suggests we should never lose hope that an individual student, or really any person, can eventually be guided towards full autonomous virtue. Development is deeply individualized.
It acknowledges context, experiences.
Exactly. Contextual factors, personal experiences, individual differences in temperament, all these mean that no two people will progress in exactly the same way or at the same speed. It really underscores the need for patience, persistence, and personalized support.
This individualized journey then brings us neatly to what's often referred to as the 3 pillars of character cultivation. The idea that character is somehow caught, taught, and sought.
Yes, let's break those down. First, caught. This is the idea that character is largely absorbed almost unconsciously through observation, through role modeling, even through what they call emotional contagion.
Like catching a mood.
Sort of, yeah. Think about a school culture and its ethos, a consistent set of values and behaviors that are modeled day in, day out by the staff, by older students. This creates an inspirational environment that subtly but powerfully promotes character development.
So it's not just informal lessons.
Oh, definitely not. It's happening everywhere. In the classrooms, sure, but also in the corridors, on the playing fields, through everyday interactions, during school assemblies, even in the way the school communicates with parents. It's the very atmosphere you breathe in. It's about seeing kindness, integrity, effort demonstrated consistently by people you respect.
Okay, that's caught. Then there's taught. This sounds more explicit.
It is. Character is also explicitly and intentionally taught through direct educational experiences, both within the formal curriculum and outside of it. This pillar is about deliberately equipping students, or anyone learning with the specific language, to talk about virtues, the knowledge and understanding of why they matter, the practical skills needed to enact them, and the positive attributes associated with them.
So structured lessons, discussions.
Exactly. Direct teaching provides the rationale, the why behind certain virtues, and it gives individuals the practical tools and strategies to actually cultivate them. It makes the implicit explicit.
And finally, sought. What does that involve?
Character is sought when schools or any supportive environment really actively provide varied opportunities that genuinely encourage individuals to seek out, to desire, and to freely pursue their own character development.
It's about personal agency.
Yes. It's about fostering internal motivation. This involves individuals forming their own personal habits, making deliberate choices based on their values, and cultivating long-term commitments over time. It's about giving individuals the chance to internalize virtues and make them truly their own, moving from external prompts and structures to an internal drive.
Like opportunities for leadership or service projects.
Precisely. Things that require them to take initiative, exercise judgment, persevere, and reflect on their actions and motivations. It's where they practice being the person they want to become.
And all 3 of these pillars, caught, taught, and sought, they really rely profoundly on the idea of community, don't they? Belonging to and actively participating in a school community or any meaningful social group feels like a deeply formative experience.
Oh, absolutely. Our sources really emphasize that character traits are not developed in isolation, sitting alone reading a book about virtue.
You have to live it with others.
You do. They are nurtured, they're challenged, they're refined within and by the communities one belongs to, whether that's your family, a religious community, a school, a sports team, your workplace, other associations.
And there's research backing this up.
Yes, research unequivocally demonstrates that values-driven schools, the ones with high expectations for both academic rigor and ethical conduct, consistently achieve superior outcomes, academic, professional, and social for their students.
Why is that?
Because their ethos, their culture, is a living expression of the collective character of everyone involved. It constantly reinforces ethical virtues and fosters truly meaningful, supportive relationships. For good character to really take root and develop, students fundamentally need to experience a profound sense of belonging, they need to feel a sense of competence in their abilities, and crucially, they need opportunities for self-determination, for making choices that matter. Community provides all of that.
This also places a significant responsibility squarely on teachers, doesn't it?
Mm.
Our sources confirm that most teachers already see character cultivation as a core, inherent part of their role.
They do. Most teachers didn't get into teaching just to drill facts. They care about the whole person. Considerations of the kind of person students are becoming and aspire to become really should be at the very heart of teaching, woven naturally into the fabric of every subject.
How does that work in practice? Like in a math class?
Well, think about it. Even beyond explicit ethical discussions, the character and integrity of the teacher themselves are often more impactful than just their personality or specific instructional techniques. Good teaching, at its core, models a deep commitment to the forms of excellence inherent in that subject matter.
Okay.
So in an art class, it might be modeling meticulous craftsmanship and attention to detail. In a science experiment, it's modeling careful, rigorous reasoning, honesty about results, collaboration. The teacher's embodiment of these intellectual and performance virtues sets a powerful, often unspoken example. They don't just teach the what, they model the how of engaging with knowledge and skill virtuously.
That's a subtle but powerful point. But what's particularly striking here, though, is this tension. Despite the growing, widespread interest in character education and its acknowledged importance, teachers often express feelings of, well, moral ambivalence or even a profound lack of self-confidence in their role as character educators.
Yes, that's a real issue highlighted in the research. Many teachers find it genuinely difficult to address complex ethical issues that inevitably arise organically in the classroom. And a major reason for this is that they often feel they haven't been adequately trained to do so.
There's a gap in their training.
There seems to be a significant systemic gap in a lot of contemporary teacher education programs. Too often, the focus in teacher training gets overshadowed by a very narrow, almost exclusive emphasis on measurable things like grade attainment metrics and classroom management techniques.
Which are important, of course, but
They are important, absolutely. But they frequently come at the expense of equipping educators with the deeper philosophical understanding, the practical pedagogical tools, and crucially, the confidence needed to effectively guide students in their moral and civic development.
it's a real disconnect then between the recognized need for character education and the actual preparation teachers receive.
It is, and it truly underscores that idea we talked about earlier. Character education needs to be intentional at every level, including, critically, in how we prepare and support our educators to fulfill this vital part of their role. You can't expect teachers to teach what they haven't been taught or feel confident in addressing.
Right. Okay, we spent a good amount of time illuminating virtues, those positive traits that help build flourishing lives. But to really get a full picture of character, we also need to shine a light on its, let's call it the dark side, the vices. What exactly are vices in this framework, and how do they oppose virtues?
Yeah, you can't really understand light without understanding shadow. Vices are generally understood as those habits, those ingrained patterns of behavior or thought that are considered immoral, undesirable, or fundamentally detrimental to flourishing. They are indeed seen as the direct opposing forces to virtues.
The negative counterpoints.
Exactly. They're the habits that pull us away from our full human potential, that undermine our well-being and our relationships. And the concept is ancient. The Greeks, for instance, were very concerned with hubris, that dangerous excessive pride, and akrasia, which is a troubling lack of self-control, knowing the good but doing the bad.
And then later, the Christian tradition formalized it.
Yes, the early Christian church famously developed and formalized this understanding into the well-known list of the 7 deadly sins. And that list has profoundly shaped Western moral thought and culture for centuries.
The classic 7 deadly sins. Okay, let's walk through them, maybe giving each a bit of a fresh, modern interpretation to see how they still manifest quite clearly in our lives today.
Sounds good. First up, pride. In modern terms, you might see this manifest as toxic narcissism or extreme arrogance. It's defined classically as an inordinate, unjustified love of one's own excellence that elevates the self improperly, leading to a distorted view of reality and one's place in the world.
Okay.
Next, then there's envy. This often shows up today as corrosive resentment or intense jealousy. It's fundamentally a sadness or bitterness at seeing another's good fortune, and maybe even, perversely, a kind of joy at their misfortune.
That sounds quite destructive.
It is. As one ancient observer beautifully put it, what rust is to iron, envy is to the soul. It just corrodes you from within.
And third.
Wrath, or uncontrolled anger and aggression. This is described as a strong, often overwhelming passion excited by a real or perhaps just a supposed injury. The danger is it easily boils over into destructive thought patterns or worse, destructive actions.
Then comes sloth, which is often misunderstood as just laziness, right?
Yeah, it's much deeper than just physical laziness or procrastination, although it certainly includes those. Sloth is seen as a more profound malady of the will, a kind of spiritual or existential apathy that causes us to neglect our important duties, whether those are spiritual, intellectual, physical, or relational. It's a fundamental lack of effort towards what is truly good and necessary for ourselves and others.
Like a failure to care.
A failure to care, a failure to engage, yes. Then comes greed, which translates very easily into modern materialism or excessive consumerism. It's an inordinate, insatiable desire to acquire more wealth, more possessions, more status, far beyond what one actually needs or reasonably deserves, often at the expense of others or deeper, more meaningful values.
Next is gluttony.
Gluttony, often seen as simply overeating, but it's broader. It's about overindulgence or excess in consumption, not just food and drink, but maybe information, entertainment, anything really. Taking significantly more than is necessary, perhaps at the wrong time, or consuming things too luxuriously or wastefully without proper regard for temperance or need. Reason, the classical view suggests, demands we consume for necessity and health, not merely for pleasure alone, especially when pleasure becomes the sole driver.
And the last one.
Finally, lust. In modern terms, this often relates to the objectification of others or problematic forms of promiscuity. It's defined as an inordinate, disordered love of the pleasures of the flesh, where physical pleasure becomes an end in itself, detached from genuine connection, intimacy, responsibility, or procreation. It risks reducing complex human beings to mere objects for gratification.
So these aren't just abstract theological concepts from centuries ago. What's the tangible impact of these vices when they take root, both for individuals and for society?
Oh, the consequences are incredibly significant and very real. For individuals, vices clearly pave the way for destructive or self-destructive behaviors. This often leads to a whole cascade of negative outcomes. Serious health problems, physical and mental, broken relationships, severe financial difficulties, profound emotional distress, a loss of meaning. They fundamentally undermine personal well-being and flourishing.
And on a bigger scale, societally.
On a broader societal scale, you can see how vices act as foundational contributors to major systemic problems. Think about how greed fuels inequality and injustice, how wrath contributes to crime and violence, how sloth can lead to civic disengagement, how unchecked gluttony or greed drives environmental degradation through relentless consumption, and how these things collectively can fuel economic instability through short-sighted, self-interested behavior.
It really paints a picture of how individual character flaws ripple outwards.
They absolutely do. And if we connect this back to Aristotle again, he had this really fascinating take on the inherently self-defeating nature of vice. He argued that even when committing injustice seems to secure some personal advantage in the short term, it's actually self-defeating in the long run for the person themselves.
How so? Why is it self-defeating?
Well, he observed that a truly vicious person is perpetually at variance with themselves. Their appetites, their base desires are often in direct conflict with their reasoned wishes or their conscience, leading to this agonizing internal disharmony, a lack of inner peace.
They're at war with themselves.
Pretty much. He suggested such individuals often don't even enjoy their own company. They feel compelled to constantly seek distractions through superficial pleasures, endless busyness, external validation essentially, to avoid confronting their own misdeeds, their own internal turmoil and regrets.
Whereas the virtuous person,
in stark contrast, Aristotle believed the virtuous person finds genuine pleasure and contentment in their own company. They are largely free from regret because their actions align with their values. Their desires are generally in harmony with their reason. They experience a profound internal coherence because they are consistently striving to be the person they believe they ought to be. There's an integrity there.
and vices are often strongly associated with something very familiar, unfortunately, in modern society: addiction.
Indeed. Addiction can be powerfully understood through this lens as a particularly potent vicious cycle. Individuals become entrapped in a pattern of behavior that becomes incredibly difficult to escape, despite often devastating consequences.
What drives that cycle?
It's typically driven by a growing psychological or physical dependence, which then leads to accumulating negative consequences in their health, relationships, work. This often sparked desperate attempts to quit, followed by the painful experience of withdrawal, physical or emotional, and then, tragically, often relapse back into the behavior, reinforcing the cycle. It truly illustrates how vices, when unchecked, can create these self-perpetuating loops of destructive behavior, severely diminishing individual autonomy, dignity, and well-being.
This brings us to a really fascinating and maybe sometimes counterintuitive intersection of emotion, vice, and virtue, especially, as you mentioned, within the specific high-pressure confines of the legal system. Let's talk about judicial anger. There's this incredibly persistent cultural script, particularly ingrained in Western legal thinking, that judges should ideally be completely dispassionate, almost emotionless, like legal automatons.
That norm is incredibly strong, yes. You can trace it back centuries. You mentioned Thomas Hobbes earlier. In the mid-1600s, he articulated the ideal judge as someone completely divested of all fear, anger, hatred, love, and compassion. Pure reason, essentially.
Wow, divested of everything.
Pretty much. And astonishingly, nearly 3 centuries later, a very prominent German jurist was still classifying the dispassionateness of the judge as a fundamental tenet of Western jurisprudence, considering it an absolute prerequisite for any scientific thinking within the law.
And even more recently.
Even more recently, think about the firestorm ignited during Justice Sonia Sotomayor's nomination hearings over the mere suggestion that she might bring empathy, just empathy to the bench. The cultural pressure for emotional neutrality, or at least the appearance of it, is immense.
Okay, let's really unpack this, because this cultural script, this expectation, it's not only fundamentally unrealistic, right? Judges are human beings, they have feelings.
Of course.
But perhaps more surprisingly, it's also, according to some sources, actually undesirable. Why?
Well, judges inevitably feel emotions. Trying to suppress them entirely, to push them down constantly, can actually do far more harm than good. It might lead to distorted judgments because the emotion leaks out in unconscious ways, or it creates intense internal conflict for the judge, or it prevents them from connecting with the human reality of the cases before them.
So pretending not to feel doesn't work.
It doesn't. And Justice William J. Brennan Jr., a real giant in American jurisprudence, powerfully countered this whole notion of pure dispassion. He argued that passion, and he meant the full complex range of human emotional and intuitive responses, is actually central to law's vitality.
How so? Central to its vitality.
He believed it actively prevents law from devolving into just a sterile bureaucracy, a cold, unfeeling machine utterly detached from human experience. And what's truly compelling now is that contemporary psychology and neuroscience are overwhelmingly confirming this kind of ancient wisdom. Without a normal capacity for emotion, human beings are actually incapable of effective, practical reason.
So emotions aren't the enemy of reason.
Not at all. Emotions aren't separate from our thinking. They actually reflect reason. They enable reason by telling us what's important. And crucially, they are educable. We can learn to manage and refine them.
And what's truly fascinating here is how this modern understanding seems to converge so remarkably with ancient Aristotelian thought. It's like Aristotle knew this thousands of years ago.
It's a powerful validation, isn't it? For Aristotle, emotions weren't just mindless surges of affect, like some sudden, irrational burst of feeling disconnected from thought. He understood that they fundamentally contain and rely on cognitive appraisals.
Cognitive appraisals, what are those?
They're essentially thoughts and judgments about the world around us, about what's happening and what it means to us.
Can you give an example?
Sure. The emotion of fear isn't just a physical sensation of a racing heart. It reflects a cognitive perception or judgment of overwhelming physical danger. Or guilt. It isn't just a vague feeling of discomfort. It attends the self-evaluation, the thought that you have transgressed a moral imperative.
So the thought comes first or is part of the emotion?
It's deeply intertwined. And because emotions embody thought, they can be rigorously evaluated. Are my thoughts, my appraisals accurate? Are they reasonable? And critically, this means emotions are educable.
Educable. How?
If we can change the way we think about things, if we change our cognitive appraisals, our emotional responses can often change accordingly. This means emotion management isn't some mystical ability you're born with or without. It's a skill. It can be trained, practiced, and refined over time through conscious effort and reflection.
So for Aristotle, an emotion itself wasn't inherently good or bad.
Exactly. Its virtue or non-virtue depended entirely on whether it reflected a correct way of viewing the world and one's place within it. Was the emotion appropriate to the situation? Was it based on accurate perception? Was it felt to the right degree.
Okay, so let's apply this incredibly nuanced view specifically to anger, which, as you mentioned, is almost unavoidable for judges. The fundamental question then isn't if judges experience anger,
Because they absolutely do.
but when is it genuinely appropriate? When is it virtuous anger rather than a vice?
Precisely. Judges are regularly confronted with stimuli that are profoundly angering. Lawyers who seem to be intentionally misleading the court, litigants who are defiant and show no respect for the process, undeniable evidence of grievous harm done by others, frustrating bureaucratic obstacles, maybe even intransigent colleagues slowing things down. The legal system itself implicitly acknowledges that anger is just a regular, unavoidable part of the judicial diet.
So the crucial question for a judge becomes, when is my anger righteous, justified, constructive? And when is it actually unjustified, counterproductive, or even a manifestation of a vice like pride or impatience?
That's the heart of it. And this is where that historical contrast between Seneca, the Stoic, and Aristotle on the nature of anger becomes incredibly illuminating.
Right. How did their views differ?
Seneca held a very strict absolute view. He argued forcefully that anger is always a mistake. He believed it necessarily vanquishes reason, that it's inherently grounded in a wrong use of reason based on false valuations, flawed logic, ultimately a sign of weakness. He famously called anger the most hideous and frenzied of all the emotions.
So for Seneca, no exceptions. Anger is always bad.
Pretty much. Even anger's clear dependence on reason, on cognitive appraisal, didn't redeem it for Seneca. Instead, he thought it merely proved that anger was a wrong application of reason, one that could only lead to irrationality and harm. Get rid of it entirely was his advice.
But Aristotle, in stark contrast, had a profoundly different take, didn't he?
Indeed. Aristotle maintained that anger can, in the right circumstances, be entirely good and proper. He even suggested it could be commingled with justice itself.
Commingled with justice. Wow.
Yes, he believed that a person should value their own safety, their dignity, their autonomy, and that it is entirely natural, even virtuous, to feel a strong impulse to respond when these core values are seriously affronted. As he memorably stated, they are thought to be fools who fail to become angry at those matters they ought. If you don't get angry about serious injustice, maybe something's wrong with you.
But he didn't just endorse uncontrolled rage, right? There was nuance.
Absolutely crucial nuance. He immediately introduced the critical concept of the mean, specifically for anger. He cautioned that anger may be felt both too much and too little, and in both cases, not well. Virtuous anger, for Aristotle, is definitely not an uncontrolled outburst. It is carefully, thoughtfully well calibrated.
Calibrated to what?
Calibrated to the specific offense, to the specific offender, and critically to the realistic prospects for correction or achieving justice. It's a response tailored precisely to the situation, using practical wisdom. It's not some blind algebraic formula, but a judgment call.
Okay, so this then raises the really important practical question for judges, or frankly, for any of us in a position of authority or just navigating difficult situations. When is anger truly righteous and justifiable? How do we know?
To be righteous, especially for judicial anger, it really must satisfy several crucial conditions according to this Aristotelian framework. Firstly, and maybe most obviously, it must rest on accurate premises.
Meaning the facts have to be right.
Exactly. For instance, was the lawyer actually lying? Or did the judge misunderstand something complex? Or simply make a mistake in hearing? We've seen, tragically, those cases mentioned in the sources where judges reacted with extreme anger to perceived defiance from jurors.
Only for it to turn out the jurors had followed mistaken instructions from the court itself.
Precisely. That anger, however intensely felt, was fundamentally unjustified because its premise, its cognitive appraisal, was flawed.
Okay, accurate premise. What else?
Secondly, the anger must be relevant to the judicial task at hand. It can't be displaced anger from, say, an argument the judge had that morning, or frustration about an earlier unrelated misstep by a lawyer or litigant. It must directly pertain to protecting the integrity of the judicial process or upholding the law in this specific instance.
And thirdly,
it must reflect worthy beliefs and values. It shouldn't stem from mere personal pride, wounded vanity, or a disrespect for fundamental legal rights. For example, a judge getting furious because their ruling was overturned on appeal, that reflects an inappropriate valuation of their own infallibility over the legal system's built-in mechanisms for correcting error. That's about ego, not justice.
so an immediate example of unjustified judicial anger might be that judge you hear about, who may be threatened or even physically engaged with a lawyer simply because they felt their authority was challenged. They valued their personal pride over the decorum and rights within the court.
That would be a classic example, yes. Or the judge who, as one review detailed, ordered jurors jailed and humiliatingly strip-searched for allegedly defying orders when tragically they had actually obeyed mistaken instructions they were given. That's an extreme, unjustified reaction based on a misconstrued affront, regardless of how provoked the judge might have felt subjectively.
Okay, so what does justified judicial anger look like then?
Well, justified judicial anger might manifest, for instance, when a judge is angered by clear evidence that government officials or any witness lied under oath on the witness stand.
Why is that justified?
Because that action fundamentally corrupts the judicial process itself. It's a profound affront to the public good, to truth-seeking, that the judge is explicitly obligated to protect. Their anger signals the gravity of that violation. Another example could be a judge expressing controlled, righteous anger, perhaps during sentencing, at a defendant's demonstrable callous harm to victims or the community.
How does that serve justice?
It doesn't just convey the court's formal disapproval, it demonstrates care for the victims, it acknowledges the defendant's moral agency and responsibility, and it underscores the profound societal impact of their actions. As one philosopher aptly put it, you cannot truly possess a robust sense of justice without also having the capacity and the willingness to be personally outraged by genuine, serious injustice. The anger fuels the pursuit of right.
But even if the anger is perfectly justified in its reason, its premise, the manifestation can still render it unvirtuous, correct? It's not just about why you're angry, but crucially how you express it.
That's a critical distinction Aristotle himself highlighted. He specifically cautioned that anger ought not be manifested either too violently nor too weakly. Even perfectly justified anger can become unvirtuous if it's expressed in a way that profoundly detracts from the dignity and impartiality of the court, or if it improperly misdirects public attention away from the core legal issue onto the judge's behavior, or if it's just demonstrably excessive and disproportionate to the offense.
So losing your temper, even for a good reason, can still be bad.
Absolutely. We've seen numerous examples documented where judges, whose anger may have been partially or even fully justified in its cause, expressed it so excessively, so explosively, shouting, throwing things, making threats, that it led to severe professional consequences for them. Sometimes it even resulted in their otherwise competent rulings being overturned or sanctions being imposed. The delivery matters just as much as the justification. It has to be dignified and controlled.
So it really boils down to judicial emotion regulation, which sounds like an incredibly difficult and nuanced skill to master, especially under the intense pressure cooker of a courtroom.
It is indeed the arduous, ongoing labor of fine-tuning emotional responses. It's not easy, but the good news, according to the research and observation, is that judges can, and demonstrably do, learn to be more strategic, more mindful, more skillful about how and when they show anger. This skill improves significantly with conscious, mindful effort and deliberate practice.
And the Aristotelian model helps here.
Yes, the Aristotelian model offers really practical, actionable tools to help achieve what we might call righteous judicial anger. It encourages judges and really anyone to rigorously examine the reasons behind their anger, to dispassionately determine, is it truly justified based on accurate premises and worthy values? Then to decide, is a public good actually served by communicating this anger? And if so, then crucially, to choose consciously to communicate it in a way that, as the saying goes, throws off more light than heat.
Meaning it clarifies and corrects rather than just inflames.
Exactly. That level of controlled, purposeful, constructive emotional expression, especially in the face of significant provocation, is truly a mark of judicial excellence. It's a hallmark of practical wisdom in action.
Okay, so we've journeyed through the theory, the ancient roots, even these specific, really complex applications like judicial anger. Now let's bring it all back home, back to you listening. How can you take practical, actionable steps to maybe overcome some vices you recognize and consciously cultivate virtues in your own life?
Right. So what for everyday life? Well, the very first and most fundamental step to overcoming any vice is simply recognizing it, becoming aware.
Sounds simple, but maybe isn't always easy.
It's often the hardest step. It requires deep, honest self-reflection, a genuine willingness to examine your own thoughts, your feelings, your recurring behaviors, maybe even your excuses, without immediately getting defensive or judgmental. It's about becoming acutely, almost forensically aware of your own patterns, especially those self-defeating ones.
And it's probably not just an internal process, right? Getting an outside view can help.
Absolutely. A critical external component is to actively seek feedback from others you trust. Ask trusted friends, family members, maybe a mentor or colleague for their honest opinions about your patterns. Sometimes our blind spots are glaringly obvious to others who care about us.
And practicing mindfulness, does that play a role?
Yes, powerfully so. Practicing mindfulness, just being fully present and aware in the moment, observing your thoughts and feelings without instantly reacting can be incredibly effective. It helps you identify the immediate triggers, the subtle underlying patterns that contribute to your vices, giving you that crucial pause, that space to intervene before they automatically take hold. Awareness is the first step to change.
Okay, so once you've recognized a vice, what are some concrete strategies for actually moving past it?
Well, several proven strategies emerge from the literature, including insights from fields like addiction recovery. First and foremost, don't try to battle it entirely alone. Seeking support is absolutely crucial.
What kind of support?
This could mean talking to a therapist or counselor, joining a relevant support group. There are groups for almost everything these days, or even just finding a trusted accountability partner, someone you can check in with honestly. This shared journey provides encouragement, perspective, and helps you feel less isolated.
And then it's about changing the behavior itself.
Yes. It's not just about stopping the negative, it's critically about actively developing new habits. You need to intentionally replace those negative behaviors with positive, virtuous ones. This isn't just about sheer willpower, which often fails. It's about consciously building new neural pathways in your brain, essentially rewiring your responses over time. Think of it as cultivating an alternative, healthier path.
And underpinning all of this.
Foundational to all of this, truly underpinning everything, is practicing self-care. You have to nurture your physical, emotional, and mental well-being. Things like getting enough sleep, eating well, exercising, managing stress, engaging in activities that restore you. These are the bedrock of self-regulation, impulse control, and having the sustained energy required for the hard work of character development. Neglecting self-care leaves us depleted and much more vulnerable to falling back into old, unhelpful vice patterns.
This brings us to a really powerful insight, doesn't it? That cultivating virtues isn't just something separate you do. It can be an incredibly effective means of overcoming vices.
Exactly. It's about more than just fighting against something negative. It's about actively growing towards something positive and genuinely empowering. It reframes the whole effort.
So, by intentionally developing positive traits, you can directly displace and diminish the negative ones.
That's the idea. For instance, actively cultivating compassion and empathy for others can be a powerful antidote to habitual wrath or unchecked anger. Practicing generosity can counteract greed. Developing humility can undermine destructive pride. Focusing on gratitude can reduce envy. Virtues are truly empowering. They don't just constrain us from doing bad, they are the very keys that unlock an individual's full potential, leading to a more harmonious, meaningful, and fulfilling existence. They offer a constructive, forward-looking path to change.
Okay, to give people a really practical framework for making better ethical decisions in general, something that maybe pulls together these ideas, one of our sources, a guide from counseling ethics, outlines 5 bedrock principles that seem broadly valuable.
Yes, these 5 principles serve as a powerful ethical compass, applicable in many fields and life situations. First, autonomy. This is about respecting the independence and self-determination of other people, encouraging their right to make choices for themselves whenever possible.
Okay.
Second, justice. This principle calls for treating equals equally and, importantly, treating unequals proportionally to their relevant differences. It's about fairness, equity, and avoiding bias in how we treat others.
Makes sense.
Third, beneficence. This is the proactive principle. It means actively contributing to the welfare of others, doing good where you can, and taking steps to prevent harm when possible.
Doing good.
Fourth, non-maleficence. Perhaps the most ancient ethical principle, often encapsulated in the phrase, above all, do no harm. It's the fundamental duty to avoid inflicting injury, suffering, or wrongdoing on others.
The baseline.
And finally, fifth, fidelity. This involves loyalty, faithfulness, and the crucial act of honoring commitments, promises, and trust placed in you by others, keeping your word.
Those 5, autonomy, justice, beneficence, non-maleficence, fidelity, provide a really robust ethical lens, don't they?
They do. And they can be seamlessly integrated into a systematic, practical, 7-step decision-making model for navigating genuinely complex ethical dilemmas, the kind where maybe these principles even seem to conflict.
Okay, let's walk through that model, maybe using that hypothetical scenario we touched on earlier. The project manager whose team member, Sarah, is underperforming due to a confidential personal crisis. How would the model work there?
Right, so step one, identify the problem. The manager needs to clearly articulate the competing issues. Sarah's performance decline impacting the project and team morale versus Sarah's personal crisis and her explicit request for confidentiality. Gather objective facts, specific missed deadlines, quality issues noted, observed changes in behavior. Avoid assumptions.
Okay. Step 2. Apply relevant ethical codes.
The manager would check company HR policies on performance, confidentiality, employee assistance programs. Are there professional codes for project managers? What do they say about balancing employee well-being and project deliverables? Consider legal aspects, too.
Step 3. Determine the nature and dimensions of the dilemma using those principles.
This is the core analysis. Autonomy. How to respect Sarah's choice about disclosure while addressing performance. Justice. Fairness to Sarah versus fairness to the rest of the team bearing the load. Beneficence. How to act for Sarah's welfare and the team's project's welfare. Non-maleficence. How to avoid harming Sarah further, for example, by breaking confidence, and avoid harming the project team by inaction. Fidelity. Balancing the promise to Sarah against responsibilities to the team and company. Fidelity. This stage might also involve consulting literature or, very carefully and confidentially, discussing the type of dilemma without names with a trusted mentor or HR professional.
Step 4. Generate potential courses of action. Brainstorming.
Exactly. List everything, even if it seems unworkable initially. Do nothing. Report Sarah's personal issues straight to HR boss. Talk directly to Sarah. Express support, state performance concerns, explore solutions together. Leave, temporary adjustment, HR support with her consent. Talk directly to Sarah. Secretly redistribute her work. Talk directly to Sarah. Just give her external counseling info. Talk directly to Sarah. Issue a formal warning immediately.
Get all options on the table. Step 5. Consider consequences and determine a course of action.
Now evaluate. Doing nothing fails beneficence to team project and possibly justice. Reporting her immediately breaks fidelity and autonomy, likely causing harm, non-maleficence. Covering for her might seem beneficent to Sarah, but fails justice to team and fidelity to company role. The strongest ethical path likely involves that direct, compassionate conversation with Sarah. It respects her autonomy by involving her, maintains fidelity as much as possible, addresses justice concerns, performance needs addressing, aims for beneficence, finding a supportive solution, and minimizes harm.
Okay, so you picked the best path. Step 6. Evaluate the selected course of action using those 3 quick tests.
Right, the final check, justice test. Would I apply this approach fairly to anyone else in a similar situation? Publicity test. Would I be comfortable if my chosen action and reasoning were reported publicly, say, in the company newsletter or even the local paper? Could I defend it? Universality test. Would I recommend the same course of action to another manager facing this exact dilemma? Universality test. If the chosen path, e.g. the supportive conversation exploring options, passes these tests, it's likely ethically sound and defensible.
And finally, step 7. Implement the course of action and follow-up.
Action time. Strengthen your resolve. Schedule that difficult but necessary conversation with Sarah. Communicate clearly, compassionately, focusing on collaboration. Then, crucially, follow up. Assess the effects. Did performance improve? Did Sarah access support? How's the team doing? This follow-up is vital for ensuring the solution worked and for your own learning as an ethical decision maker. And it's vital to remember, especially in messy human situations, there is rarely one single perfect right answer that satisfies everyone completely.
Right.
But using a systematic model like this ensures that you can always provide a professional, thoughtful, and ethically justifiable explanation for the course of action you chose, even if others might have weighed the principles slightly differently. It shows you did your due diligence.
So bringing this all together, what does this mean for you, the listener? This deep dive into character, virtue, vice, ethical decision-making. It really isn't just abstract philosophy for academics or rigid guidelines just for judges or managers in tough spots, is it?
Not at all. The ability to deeply reflect on our own character, to actively and intentionally cultivate virtues within ourselves, patience, courage, compassion, honesty, practical wisdom, and to apply these robust ethical principles in our daily choices, whether it's a huge professional decision or a small, seemingly insignificant personal interaction. That ability is profoundly empowering for everyone.
Gives you tools for living better.
Exactly. This structured approach to thinking about right action and right being provides a powerful framework. It can be applied to virtually any personal or professional challenge you face, helping you make sounder, more considered, more ethically grounded decisions throughout your entire life. It really helps move us away from just reactive, impulsive behavior towards more proactive, intentional, and ultimately more flourishing living.
Today, we've taken a truly remarkable deep dive, haven't we? Journeying all the way from Aristotle's ancient Greece right through to the bustling corridors of modern classrooms and the complex, high-stakes dynamics of courtrooms.
It's been quite a journey, and throughout it, we've unearthed how the deliberate development of character, the conscious cultivation of virtues like courage, compassion, and that crucial practical wisdom, along with a nuanced understanding of vices.
Hmm.
These are not just abstract philosophical concepts floating in the ether.
Yeah, they feel very real.
They are fundamental, living forces that profoundly shape individual human lives, build resilient, trusting communities, and ultimately underpin flourishing, functional societies.
And we've highlighted that character isn't some fixed, innate quality you're stuck with. It is wonderfully educable. That means it can be intentionally developed, nurtured, and refined throughout our entire lives. It's no
Yeah.
too late to work on your character.
That's such a hopeful message. We've also seen how its cultivation is arguably a foundational right that every child should ideally have access to, setting them up for success, and how it directly empowers individuals, children and adults alike, to lead fuller, more meaningful, and ultimately more flourishing lives in that deep Aristotelian sense.
And we've truly grasped, I think, that good character isn't just nice to have. It's the indispensable foundation for so many positive outcomes we all desire. From improved academic attainment and better social behavior in schools, to increased employability and ethical leadership in a complex world.
And most importantly, the creation and sustenance of truly flourishing, just, and cooperative societies. We've seen how character is powerfully caught through the implicit lessons of inspiring role models and supportive environments.
How it needs to be diligently taught through intentional educational experiences that give us the language and understanding.
And how it must ultimately be passionately sought through deeply personal commitment, practice, and self-agency. All three are vital.
As Aristotle, with his truly timeless wisdom, so eloquently reminded us centuries ago, what we are most anxious to produce is a certain moral character in our fellow citizens, namely a disposition to virtue and the performance of virtuous actions.
That really sums up the societal importance, doesn't it?
It does. So with that profound thought maybe echoing in your mind, we invite you, listening now, to reflect. What small, intentional step could you take today, this week, to consciously cultivate a virtue you particularly admire in others, or perhaps to gently challenge a vice you recognize, maybe uncomfortably within yourself?
Even a tiny, deliberate step in this direction, choosing patience in traffic, offering help when it's inconvenient, speaking up honestly but kindly, contributes not only to your own personal flourishing, but also, ripple by ripple, to the greater well-being of your community and the world around you. Character is built brick by brick.
The journey of character development is, by its very nature, a lifelong one, isn't it? Filled with continuous learning, inevitable setbacks, and hopefully ongoing growth.
Absolutely. So we sincerely invite you to continue exploring these rich, vital ideas, perhaps by taking just a moment later today to reflect on recent situations where you've seen virtue or vice play out, either in your own life or among those around you. What did you learn from it?
Or maybe consider how these timeless principles of virtue, practical wisdom, and ethical reflection could powerfully guide your next big decision, whatever that might be, transforming it from just a choice about what to do into a conscious act of shaping who you want to be.